the news. Everything in Washington is going smooth. I want to thank you all for coming, and just to talk a little bit, first of all, about what we want to do tonight. I want to thank David Briggs, who made this place available. David, where are you? There he is, Mr. Briggs. Thank you. And my wife, Margaret, is here. Where are you hiding? Thanks, Margaret. And my law partner, Donald Graham, is here, and he and I are like mystified because we've never been in White River. We were here like 30 years ago when we had a parking problem. And David Briggs told me that's a good problem to have. And by the way, we all feel very badly about the terrible fire here, but what I'm being told is that things are coming back. So we'll wish everybody well, and glad nobody was hurt in that fire. But tonight is a serious discussion. Enormous concern, people calling the office, people writing about the question of what is happening to our country with this new president. And tonight what we want to do is, I'll just make a few opening remarks, but then we want to open it up for anybody who wants to make a comment or a question, because we do have to figure out what we're going to do going forward. First of all, you are right to be concerned. And I won't go through the whole litany, but just think about living in a country where for the first time in my lifetime, the president used the authority of the presidency to sign an executive order where he said anybody from one of seven countries who was a Muslim, in effect, could not come to this country. And that is fundamentally a ban on the basis of religion. And I am so relieved that the courts found that to be what you and I know it was, absolutely unconstitutional. We do not have a religious test in this country. But it's astonishing to all of us that the highest officer in our land signed an executive order that was intended to implement a religious test. Other things in domestic policy. The health care bill, I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And we're the ones that are going to be voting on this question of repealing the health care bill. That bill is largely written, but totally invisible. I am going to be going into my committee next week to be having a discussion about this bill that is of enormous consequence. Whatever your point of view is on that bill, it's of enormous consequence to you, to our kids, to the economy of this state. I haven't seen it, and I can't see it. We tried to find it last week. It's like under lock and key. This is a democracy. That should be totally out in the open for us to inspect, for us to kick the tires, for us to have a debate. That knowledge belongs to you. And when even your elected representative can't get access to it, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the way democracy is functioning. And then the third example, this whole Russian connection situation is serious. You know, the reports go on, but the Attorney General is really compromised in the ability to do any independent investigation. And the issue here is not who the Russians were for. The issue is not whether they were hacking. They shouldn't do that, but big powers, particularly Russia, does do that. The real question for us is, was there any involvement between any of the folks in the Trump campaign and the Russians? And we don't know the answer to that. What we know is there was a lot of contact. And my view, you're entitled to know that. So what I am hearing from so many Vermonters, you know, pick your issue, but it's fundamentally a question about the strength of our democracy and whether we're going to abide by what has been the guardrails from the Constitution to resolve the real challenges that this country faces. And what alarms me as a citizen, let alone as your representative, is that the guardrails that guided us, you know, you could have people way on the left or way on the right, but they would never, on either side, basically say that we can have some religious test. They wouldn't say that you can write a bill that's going to affect all of America without having it see the light of day almost until the day that you're going to vote on it. They wouldn't condone activities with a foreign government that were going to affect an election. You could just have confidence that as much as you disagreed with somebody that was going to vote a different way than you did, that you were united on basic democratic principles. And what I'm hearing from people in this room, from Vermonters, is that they're wondering whether that commitment, common commitment that has held us together, is being challenged. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions or comments. I know we've got a lot of folks who've been involved in some of the indivisible groups that are springing up around the state. And it's pretty exciting to me, by the way. This is the good news, that so many people are being active. I'd just be interested in a show of hands of people who haven't, in the past, spent their Friday nights at the Briggs Opera House to talk politics. Look at that, it's amazing. Well, that's good. Well, you're going to like it. You know, it's really kind of exciting. But the last thing I'm going to say, people wonder whether we're going to get back on track. Somehow, some way we are. And I'll tell you, I believe that there is nothing wrong with America that what's right with America can't fix. And that's why we're here. So, who wants to be the first person? We've got a microphone here, a microphone there. Why don't you give your name and your comment?
Hi, my name is Sharon Blake. I am one of your constituents, and I am not being paid. I have two questions. What can I do to help Jeff Sessions to step down?
Give him a little nudge. Go ahead.
The other question is, with the constant deluge of lies coming out of the Trump White House, when can we expect his impeachment? And what can I do to help bring that about?
Well, here's the situation. You speak apparently for a lot of people. There's two things. One, with Sessions, finally, there's a lot of Democrats, a lot of us who basically agree that he should step down. He's really compromised to be able to be the chief law enforcement officer when it's very explicit that he did not answer truthfully in response to a question from, I believe it was Senator Franken, and then also a follow-up question from Senator Leahy about having meetings with the Russians. And then he said that he met with the ambassador of Russia as a senator when he was doing that at a convention where he was there on behalf of Mr. Trump. So I happen to agree. And the press, the free press that is so ridiculed by President Trump is actually playing a major role, because what's escalating the pressure on them is revelations that are coming as a result of really good investigative journalism, primarily by the Washington Post and the New York Times. Second, let me speak candidly about impeachment. The reason I think most people who contact me about impeachment and suggest that as a tactic is it's a way of expressing their absolute outrage about what's going on. But it's not a quick and easy solution. I mean, first of all, you have to get 218 votes in the House in order to, quote, indict. There's 248 Republicans. You have to get you have to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate, 67 votes, and there's 54 Republicans, all of whom most likely would be supportive. And then you also have to consider the fact that there's a vice president who would become president. So I don't. The other thing we have to deal with, actually, and acknowledge, we just had an election. All right, so we don't. Some people. I didn't vote for Trump. Okay, but America elected him, and it's not as though within 40 days of an election you can undo it easily by an impeachment without significant repercussions. So, as far as that being a practical option, I think there's a lot of impediments. But I get your point. Thank you. Yes.
Congressman Welch, thank you for having us today. My name is Laura Simon. I've been working as a teacher, a social worker, an environmental activist, and a social justice activist, and I'm concerned about the climate. In particular, I'm concerned about fracked gas because we have a fracked gas pipeline just about ready to finish in Addison County. Well, actually, it's in Heinsberg, the little section. But I have some news for you. Yesterday, our coalition of people here in Vermont met with the Vermont legislature. They have a climate solutions caucus, and my estimate today is 20 of them signed a statement going to the Public Service Board saying to open that certificate about that fracked gas pipeline and look at it again because there's new information. And I'm going to send you a lot of that new research because we already got it together for them. And I'm going to just leave you with a little picture of the fracked gas leaks. In case you never thought.
Thank you.
That's in the Boston area. I know you always wanted that. And I'm going to send you that information. And I'm just hoping that you all could do whatever you can to make sure we're working in the right direction on the climate. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me say something, because this is one of the things that's really alarming. I mean, there's two areas. You've got actions where it's a challenge to our basic civil rights, like the ban, like the attack on the press. But then you've got policies that are really threatening to our future. This administration does not believe climate change exists, and that's bizarre. Steve Bannon is promoting getting out of the Paris climate change accords. That would be a catastrophe. We have voluntary participation by basically all the countries in the world to try to start doing something about it, and Donald Trump is literally thinking about pulling out. He just got rid of, did you see this? This is unreal. We just got rid of the stream protection rule that, does the radical thing of saying you can't dump coal in streams. And that is really damaging. So how are we going to get back on that? A lot of us are doing everything we can in Congress, obviously, to get back on the track and make climate change a real issue. Interestingly enough, a lot of the major corporations, including some of the utility companies, they get it that climate change is real, but they also are trying to start changing their business model because they know something that we've figured out in Vermont. Governor Shumlin did a great job on this, that if we take on the challenge of climate change, we can actually create jobs as well as make a cleaner environment. So I appreciate, Laura, your point, but that should be a cause of enormous concern, turning our back on the degradation of our climate that's happening in Washington today. Yes, sir. Hi.
Pete, Jim Uculo here. One question, there are many, but one that concerns me is the fact that his son-in-law and his daughter are there with him, with Trump.
Well, you know what? Again, a pretty good point.
And I thought they weren't supposed to be involved as family members.
I don't know that they can't be involved as family members, okay? And I actually don't even begrudge a president having family members around. What I do begrudge is the idea that just because he's your son-in-law, and 2 months ago he was a man about town in Manhattan, suddenly that qualifies him to be the person who's going to solve the Mideast crisis. So that's the aspect of it that I find pretty disrespectful. It takes like experience, it takes like knowledge, it takes like, commitment to do really hard things. And that's the aspect of that that I share your concern about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes, hi.
Congressman. My name is Penny Thomas. I'm from the Northeast Kingdom, Newport, Vermont.
Yeah.
And while it's very tempting to get excited about all of the terrible things that our current president is doing, I appreciate your membership in the No Labels organization and enjoyed watching you on that from afar. And my question is, what can we do to compromise around taxes and the infrastructure spending? What specific ideas do you have about where we could accomplish something in what is currently a hostile environment? And I will say one other thing. I'm a member of a group, Indivisible, in the Northeast Kingdom, and we are going to be marching up on the line tomorrow to say immigrants are about hope, and we are not about walls. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Well, you know, I really appreciate that because, you know, what politics is supposed to be about is us getting together and figuring out how to solve problems that stand in the way of us making progress on things that affect all of us. And obviously, infrastructure is something where we want to rebuild our roads and bridges. We want better train systems. We want airports that are updated. We want broadband build out in rural America so everybody has access to the same level of internet. And the challenges are significant, but they're solvable. And the biggest impediment to it is the kind of inability of the people who are elected to get together and sit down and talk concretely about, all right, let's make some progress. And one of the reasons I'm in No Labels, one of the reasons I work with Republicans so much is I come out of the Vermont experience. You know, when I was in the State House, when I first went there, was a state senator from Windsor County. There were no Democrats, there was very few Democrats, and it was unusual that I won that race. I got to the Senate, Republicans gave me a really good set of committee assignments. And it's like a lesson I never forgot because I was probably in a mood to just be a troublemaker. But then they like gave me a seat at the table and all of a sudden I had to like, you know, cooperate, work. And what happened after that is that when I then became the head of the Senate, I appointed Republicans to serve as committee chairs. And it wasn't like I was a good guy. When I tell some of my colleagues in Washington I did that, they literally think I need a mental status exam. You know, you just don't do that. But it was because it was the way to get things done. And it worked out, and they were really good people. In fact, Phil Scott was one of them. He became the chair of the Institutions Committee. So this is the reason I try to keep reaching out and why I so appreciate your focus on problem solving as opposed to just the rhetoric. Thank you. Hi.
I don't know if you can hear me or if it's necessary. Frank Gatto, White River Junction. You talk about getting things done. I've tried to get things done, and one of the impediments I've reached is in your office. A few years ago, I called because I suffer from gout, and I used to take a medication called colchicine. Colchicine is used in the treatment of gout and has been used for that since well before the 20th century. It was long before the FDA was set up. It was in general use. Anybody could manufacture it. A pharmaceutical firm that dealt in knockoffs, you know, when drugs went off patent and they would make them available at a lower price, noticed that there had never been a field trial on a question of dosage. And so they had a very small number of people they got in touch with. I had the number 543 sticks in my mind, but I wouldn't swear for it. As a result of that test, which was inconclusive, they got a patent on it. Suddenly, what I had been paying $5 a month for, or $15, jumped in price to nearly $100. I did a little research, and I discovered that this was going on around the country. As of today, I just checked this before I came down, this medication, which not all that long ago was available for $5 or $15 for a 3-month supply, at Walgreens is $82.99. At Walmart, $123.60. At CVS, $148.96. The same at Target. At Kroger's, $151.21. Safeway, $160.82. Rite Aid, $184.33. Kmart, $185. Publix, $185. And here's a real bargain. You get it at the warehouse, something called the Health Warehouse, $422.90. I spoke to a man named, well, I'll leave that for the moment. I was told by your assistant that you would be looking into it. Nothing ever happened. I called again. Nothing ever happened. That's not a unique experience. Not long ago, it was discovered that I had pulmonary embolisms, and so I had to take a medication. I was told by the physician that they would put me on Aliquis. I said, how much does that cost? She said, I don't know. I said, you should know. Well, I was taking warfarin, which was used initially as rat poison, and it was really very cheap. But here are these physicians recommending Aliquis and what's the one that Xarelto, which, you know, they run these commercials at the same time. They also run other commercials by lawyers who want you to call them up so they can make big profits on their suits, right? This is terrible. I looked into it, and I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. I get very exercised about this. Once every 6 weeks or every 5 weeks, I would go to Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and they would take my blood and they would check my INR, the clotting rate, and then I would go back and so forth. The charge for this was not the same, however. Sometimes when I went in, I would get one charge, and then it jumped to 2 charges. Well, why is it 2 charges? Well, they had just hired somebody to give them advice on how to charge, and they discovered that there were really 2 operations. One was sticking my finger, and the other one was getting the piece of blood on a little strip of plastic and putting it in a meter reader. 2 operations. And then if they changed my dosage because I had broccoli that week, they wanted to charge another fee for consultations. I went to the hospital and tried to follow that up. It turns out that even in that, they're not consistent. I did some research down in New Jersey. How much do you charge for this and that? Well, it depends. Depends on what? Depends on what the insurance company will pay. Oh, now all of this is supported by us. You're on the healthcare committee. Why haven't you done something about this? I called about this again.
Let me try to answer it.
Someone named Isaac, I believe. And he was going to call me back. When nothing was done, I checked back. I got no response.
All right, let me tell you what you've just done. You've described the mess that's our healthcare system.
Absolutely.
Right. And I have not been able to do anything about it, but that's not for lack of trying. The prescription drugs, just to speak about that, the prices on those are outrageous.
Yes.
And I have been, and many of us have been fighting to lower those costs. I'll give a couple of examples. Right now, if you're in the VA and you get a prescription drug, the cost of that to the taxpayer, to us, is about 60% less than what it is if you get the same medication in Medicare. You know why? Because when the Medicare prescription drug program was passed, it was put into law that the government couldn't negotiate bulk price discounts when they bought those prescription drugs. So it's costing us hundreds of billions of dollars more because the pharmaceutical company got a sweetheart deal. And you're the victim of that, all right? So there's a lot of us.
We're all the victims.
We're all the victims of it. And
I'm not paying these prices.
No, I get it. Listen, I get it.
We all are.
But I'm saying that there's a lot of us who understand what you're saying and are doing all we can to try to change it, but we don't have the votes to get that done yet, but I hear you, all right? The other thing, just think of some other ones. Remember that guy, Martin Shkreli? All right, he bought a company that had a product that was costing $15 per dose. The day after he got the company, no money spent on research, had nothing to do with inventing the prescription drug. He boosted the price to $1,500, okay? Now, some of my colleagues in Congress call that the free market. I call that price fixing, all right? So we got a fight on our hands, and you have very eloquently and very concretely shown what's happened to real people who have real medical needs for prescription drugs when the government is standing by and essentially letting Big Pharma get away with murder. So I'm going to stay on that, and I'd love to get those figures from you. Yeah, but we've got to get to other folks here.
I realize that. One very short footnote. You very properly objected to the fact that the new bill, supposedly, has not been seen by you or anybody else in the House of Representatives. But when the ACA bill was first passed, people voted for it without having read it. Even if they had taken 3 Evelyn Wood courses at the same time, they could not possibly have read
you know what? You want to know something?
I'm leaving now.
Yeah, no, but I want to say, I read the bill. We're in a whole new, I was on the committee, and I read the bill. And by the way, we had a public option in that bill as it passed the House, which would have done a lot to help on this pricing side. Okay, and by the way, the other thing is there are things we could change and improve in the health care bill, all right? But you've got to have partners who are willing to do it. One of the reasons, getting back to the person from No Labels, that in the Vermont Senate, we always try to get bipartisan support was because, it would, especially on complicated issues, is would give people some confidence that we probably got it more right than wrong. I don't think anybody expects perfect. More right than wrong is pretty good, and then if you're willing to make right what you got wrong. So I did read the bill. I'd like to see the bill. You know what I mean? Before I vote on it. Thank you. Yes.
Well, this gentleman has eloquently described health care. There is still environmental issues. There is still global warming, as you mentioned, and many other issues that you and I and most people in this room want to see go one way, but unfortunately both the majority in the Congress and the President want to go the other way. What I want to ask is, what can we do at this point to help you and to help get people elected maybe in other places where they might be electing the wrong folks? What can we do to help get this thing turned around on the local and on the grassroots level?
Well, you're partly doing it by getting out in these indivisible groups that have been getting together. I mean, I
just
think
joined the one in Chester.
You did, good for you.
We just formed one in Chester.
Well, that's great. Congratulations. You know, I struggle with that like you all struggle with it. You know, a lot of times people look at me and say, Peter, how can you get, you know, how do you do this? And aside from, you know, a little bit of bourbon, all of us want to make this a better country. That's what we want to do. We're here because we care. And we don't get to pick the times that we live in, but we decide whether we're going to engage in the challenges of the times that we live in. And I feel very lucky to have the support of Vermont to wake up each day, cross the street, and go to the Capitol, and just fight the fight every day, even though I don't know how it's going to end up. And right now, it's kind of stacked as an uphill deal. But we got to keep going and try to make that progress. I think that the leadership in this country right now is coming from local and state efforts. I really don't want you to underestimate the importance of you doing town meeting stuff, you involved in your local indivisible group, you involved in your local climate change group, you involved in your own energy program that are springing up in communities all around. That makes a difference. It's a solid foundation. And Washington right now has lost its way, all right? We're trying to do what we can to get back to where we need to be. Is that me?
It's not me.
It's the president. Want to hear from people? Here it is. Sorry. I had to take the call, you know?
Thank you. Mine will be Scott.
All right. But it really matters. The other thing is, it does matter, you know, when I hear from a Vermonter, obviously that matters to us in the office. If I hear from somebody outside, it doesn't mean so much. But you may have friends or relatives in other districts where you can ask them, contact your member of Congress and tell them what you think. That makes sense. Give some thought, give some effort to the people that you know that are in a district where you think if they heard from somebody in that district, that might impact them. And members of Congress do pay attention to the feedback they get from their constituents. That really, really does matter, okay? So that's another thing you can do. Yes?
Hi, I'm Carol Lane from White River, and I want to say that I am a very proud granddaughter of 3 immigrants, and I am very concerned about what's going on with immigrants, but that's not my main concern. I am a retired teacher from the town of Hartford, and I am very concerned about this Secretary of Education and what she will do to our education. I also taught voting and government to 5th graders for the most of my life, and I am very concerned about what children are seeing when the President of the United States tells news media that they can't come to events.
Well, thank you. And it's an eloquent comment. I can't add to it. I share your concern, and I bet everybody here does. Thank you. Roger.
Hi, Professor Roger Masters from Dartmouth. I want to thank you for everything you do for the whole country by what you do every day of the week. I came across the river from New Hampshire to make sure I could say that, but also on public health, facts matter more than the press seems to know or than Republicans seem to know, and I want to assure you know some facts. The same thing for environment. I forgot, I got a sorry, but I'll send you this. People deny there's such a thing as global warming. NASA has a photograph of the ice pack on the North Pole in 2012. And they put a line where that same ice pack was in 1979. The space between the two things, which is melted sea ice, is 300,000 square miles.
Wow.
Somebody who looks at that, you give that to a Republican and ask him, explain this, please. Because if you have some facts and you say, explain these facts, and here's one that's important on health care. Comparing health care in the United States with the average in other industrial countries is fascinating. It's fascinating because our health care costs, before, this is back in 2007-8, was costing 2.5 times more than the health care in Europe. 1 year less life expectancy. Wow. But more than that, for these people who talk about the right to life, which is a fetus, for every 10,000 infants, 17 or 18 would die in America who would not die in Europe. Oh, the fetus, that's life. A real live child? Oh, I don't care about that. So I want to just give you these numbers so you have them.
All right.
But thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate it. Yes.
Hi,
Thanks.
My name's Tracy Bach, and I live in Thetford. And I first want to thank you for coming here. And I also want to thank your staff, because before January 20th, you were not on my speed dial. But now you, Bernie, and Pat, and the White House are. And so I regardless,
Good.
Your office picks up on the second ring. And in fact, Elizabeth called me back because I was bugging her last week that I didn't see a town hall.
She told me.
Oh, shoot. Okay. So here's my real question, and I'd like an inside the Beltway view on this. So climate change has been brought up several times, and I think it was about 3 weeks ago, a Republican group led by Schultz, the kind of the old guard, Baker, the Climate Leadership Counselor Summit, introduced what they called a carbon dividend plan.
Right.
Essentially a carbon tax. And it got a lot of hoopla. It made Wall Street Journal. I mean, clearly there was a rollout with the comms. And I haven't seen it taken up by Congress. And I'm very curious why. I've done my own research, just generally, but I'd love an inside the Beltway view on where that's going or not.
Well,
and what we
just
could do.
so that people know, that was former Secretary of State Schultz and I think Secretary of State Baker. Yeah, it was very prominent Republicans.
Henry
Yeah,
Paulson. And, yeah.
Right, and they get it. They understand climate change is real, and they understand that unless there's a price on carbon that reflects the true cost, that you're not going to have any kind of market-based incentive to reduce carbon in transition. So I thought that was a tremendous thing. That is not Donald Trump's view, okay? And here's I think there's two things about climate change in Congress. Number one, a lot of the members of Congress that, again, I'm in the Energy and Commerce Committee where, you know, in the same year we passed the health care bill, we passed the Waxman-Markey climate change bill, which if you remember, was going to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. It didn't get through the Senate, lost by 1 vote. Thank you, Joe Lieberman. But my Republican colleagues fall into 2 groups on this, and some of my Democratic colleagues too. Some are deniers. They just don't believe it. But some are fearful about what the implications are to the folks who work in industries that are dependent on fossil fuels, like the coal fields. I understand that. And in an effort to try to show that, I went to a coal mine in West Virginia with a colleague who represented that district. And we went down 1,000 feet in the coal mine at 4.5 miles in. I was down there for several hours. I was with the coal miners. We came out and had what they call a lunch, which was more food than I eat at Thanksgiving. These are good people. They work hard. And on that Friday, it was a Friday I was there, I was asking what you're going to do tonight. And you know what, they all go to football games, high school football games on Friday night. It's like the family deal. Well, 10 years ago, they had 8 high schools in that area. Now they have 3. That is hard. So some of my colleagues are feeling that pain of those folks. The solution is not more coal, but the acknowledgement that we who really believe that climate change is real and want to get onto renewable energy, my view, we really have an obligation to acknowledge that there's real economic pain and dislocation for good people who did not cause climate change. You know, I said to these miners is that, look, I come from Vermont, we don't have coal mines, but we've got electricity, and we thank you for keeping the lights on for the last 100 years. So that's the thing we have to do, is really acknowledge that to make that transition, we've got to be all in on helping folks who are affected by it. And that's a way to try to create some connection to members of Congress who represent these folks and have legitimate concern about their well-being. They're good families, they're good people. So that's the part that we have to do. Now, what's really bad about President Trump is he's not saying how we can make that transition. He's continuing to say something he knows is not true, that climate change isn't real. He knows that. And, you know, and that's what's so, I think, that's a failure of leadership. I mean, your job as president is to help people get over their apprehensions and see the possibility in taking on the challenge that the country faces. So thank you for your good work.
And so there are no Republicans in Congress that are taking up this dividend?
Oh, no, there are.
Bills?
No, the dividend one, there isn't. I'm on a bill to do that, but that doesn't have a chance as they see it in the right, just on the calculus of it. So I don't think any of the Republicans are following the Baker-Schultz recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Good evening, Congressman. My name is Darren Raleigh. I am born and raised right here in White River Junction. I have a question about the Electoral College. I heard someone earlier mention impeaching President Trump. I absolutely would support that wholeheartedly, but I think we have to think long term. And I know there are a lot of Bernie supporters in this room and a lot of Hillary supporters in this room.
Right.
And that's unique here in Vermont. But my question is really, what do we do about the popular vote? What are your plans for the popular vote, and how do we change the Electoral College?
It's tough to change the Electoral College. I mean, I'd be fine with having a popular vote, but changing the Electoral College would really require a constitutional amendment, and the process to get an amendment changed is very, very uphill. So I don't have a lot of optimism that that will happen. And but the other thing I'd say is that, you know, this time Hillary Clinton got the majority of the popular vote.
Right.
The Electoral College votes went to now President Trump. But it really, there's an element of, I think, self-analysis and criticism that those of us on the Democratic side have to acknowledge, that all those folks in the Rust Belt states that we like to think we represent, they weren't buying what we were selling. Okay, right. So it really is a reflection. I think this was a tribute to Bernie. He understood that there's a lot of people in this country who've been left behind, or they're stagnant in their wages. We've had this recovery since '08, but a lot of folks haven't been part of that. And these are good people, and it's a real tough transition in our economy. And unless and until the economic system and the political system is appearing and actually being responsive to those people and their genuine aspirations, they may vote for somebody that they think is at least standing up for them.
I don't want to take up too much time, but I have a lot of friends who chose not to vote in Vermont because they felt that their votes didn't matter. So how do we change people's minds here?
Well, you know, that's not my problem. No, seriously, that is your problem. If somebody decides they're not going to vote, that's a free and independent decision. I really disagree with it, and I don't like it. I mean, I can do my best to say why you should get out and vote. You can do that with your friends, all right? But that's on the person who's not voting. And look what's happened. And we have a lot of folks who decided in the general election they weren't going to show up. Some of those were Bernie supporters. And, you know, all of us like the perfect, but sometimes you got to settle for the good. You know what I mean? But that's this responsibility, I believe, of each of us as a citizen.
I think that's especially problematic here in the Upper Valley since, you know, a mile over in New Hampshire, people don't feel that same my vote doesn't count kind of thing.
Right, but what we're seeing here is that being involved in politics is not just showing up to vote. That's important. And the election's important because it gets the conversation going about what you want and how do you get it. But that's why I'm so excited there's so many people here who aren't normally out at a Friday night at some political discussion. And that sense of civic renewal where we're engaged day in and day out, whether it's on the school board or the select board, whether it's in a local activity, that really matters. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Got some help here?
I've got company, moral support.
Good.
I'm Jonathan Teller-Ellsberg from Norwich. And one thing I would like to do is thank you. I know you voted against the, it was a congressional declaration against the United Nations not long ago, because the United Nations had said that expanding Israeli settlements in the West Bank was a bad idea, and you voted against condemning that, in effect supporting that. And I would like to thank you for that. I know that in this political world, that's not necessarily the easiest vote, but it was the right vote. So
thank you.
And I just want to, raise. I know you clearly are have that on your mind, but among all of the other endless series of important issues, I hope that you will keep that one on your mind. The idea that David Friedman will, maybe ambassador to Israel is quite disconcerting, and the notion that Israel is now going to aggressively expand settlements it's quite awful. So
well, thank you.
That comment. And if I could make one other attempted political science comment about what can we do and long term and stuff like that. Again, this has a lot to do with, as you said, reaching out to people, friends, family who live elsewhere. The local politics is enormously important. It's the state level. It's the state legislatures that decide districting. And there's the example of North Carolina. The popular vote at this last election for the congressional level was, the Democrats were not very much below the Republicans in popular vote, but something like 13 out of 15 of the representatives are Republican, and it's because of gerrymandering of the districts. So to the extent that people can get involved locally in states that have more than one district, that's incredibly powerful, over the long term.
Thank you. Yeah. But by the way, the gerrymandering is brutal. We don't have that issue here in Vermont. But what happened in 2010 when we got hammered, when Democrats got hammered after voting for the Affordable Care Act, the state houses all shifted too, and there was both parties have done gerrymandering, but it was very intense. And as a result, it's skewed, and it's bad in a couple of ways. It's not just one of the reasons it's really bad is that in these districts that are just designed for a very liberal Democrat or a very conservative Republican, it really erodes the desire to compromise, because the member who serves in that district is more worried about a primary than they are about a general. If they get through the primary, they're going to be okay. And the best example of that was Eric Cantor. You know, he was the majority leader. And interestingly enough, he was quite helpful to us in Vermont when we had Tropical Storm Irene, because we had an uphill battle to get the money, and he was quite helpful to us. But he was considered to be not conservative enough on immigration. And I know Eric Cantor, he was plenty conservative on immigration. But he got attacked from the right, and this David Bratt took out the majority leader, and he was the first majority leader in the history of the country to lose in a primary. But that's the effect of gerrymandering. So President Obama is going to be working with Eric Holder and this other group, and one of their big goals is going to be to address the gerrymandering problem. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi. I'm Patrick Proctor from Woodstock, Vermont, and I want to follow up on your statements about bipartisan work in Congress. And I guess I really, you know, it's one thing in Vermont in the State House where it's local and there is this sense of working for the Vermonters and everybody's in it together and we're all, you know, in similar economic conditions and similar climate conditions and all these different kinds of things. But the way the Republican members of Congress have been acting over the past, you know, since 2010, or, you know, it's been completely blockading anything getting done. You know, it's not something where they're trying to stand up for their own views. They're literally being non-productive. And meanwhile, even since Obama got elected in 2008, Democrats have stuck by this thing of, you know, reach across the aisle, bipartisan, you know, we want to work together, all this kind of thing. And now we're looking at, even in the face of these allegations about Russia and all the different things that are coming down, we still have these Republican members of Congress who are saying, I'm not willing to even look at that. They're not saying I'm willing to consider it. And some of them are considering it and standing up for it. Right. But some of them are just completely turning a blind eye. And I think especially the leadership on the Republican side is just going ahead full steam, right? And I guess I have this question for you and more generally for the Democratic caucus, like, when is enough enough? When are you going to stop being nice? Enough
is enough right now. All right, but let me tell you how I try to do my job, because you're raising a good point. And in fact, after President Obama was elected, remember Mitch McConnell famously said that his job was to see that he was a one-term president, and then it was just a constant fight for failure. And you know what? I actually couldn't live with myself if that's the way I approached my job. It's got to be a fight for success. But here's the way I'm doing it with. When President Trump is advocating things that actually compromise our civil liberties, I am fiercely opposed, and I'm not going to compromise at all. I think this Muslim ban is absolutely outrageous, and I will fight that tooth and nail. When he attacks the free press, there's no compromise. He said in his his address to Congress that he wants to lower prescription drug prices. I think that's good for America. We heard this man. Where are you? Yeah. I mean, think of what he's going through, all right? And if President Trump is willing to work to bring down prescription drug prices, I'm going to show up. I'm going to be willing to do it. So I'm going to make a decision on a case-by-case basis. But my decision on any challenge to our civil liberties or our constitutional protections, I'm uncompromising, unyielding. And that's been the Vermont tradition.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is Karen Harris. I live in Norwich. And two questions. One, I'm in addition to everything else I'm concerned about that people have mentioned, I'm really concerned about this sort of move to start gutting the Environmental Protection Agency, just make the budget so small that there's no agency, and also moves to make it possible to not allow states to move ahead of the federal government on environmental issues. And so I'm curious about what's possible in this environment for fighting that, especially since some of it's sort of budget related. And then to build on the last question, if this is related, do you see any opportunities to actually pick off any Republican partners or work with Republican partners on any of those issues?
Well, first of all, you're right. Okay, your concern, I'm regretfully acknowledge, is well-founded. I mean, the budget that they're proposing is to add $54 billion to the Pentagon, and to take that out of domestic programs, including like a 1/3 cut or 25% cut of the EPA. That'll directly result in reduction of the grants that we get to provide try to get clean water here in Vermont and Lake Champlain. It is going to cut the workforce by about 25%. So that is an all-out assault on the environment, and not to mention getting rid of the stream protection rule. Not to mention the discussion in the Trump administration to get out of the Paris Climate Accords. So that's really, really serious. And my job on your behalf is to fight that as much and as loudly and as vigorously as I can. That's my job. But again, what do we do? It gets back to the local efforts that you can make where it's within your power to have an energy committee in Norwich or Thetford, to have a state legislature that's really doing everything it can to promote clean energy, to have entrepreneurs here, and we have a lot of them, who are doing things that are providing options for people to get more energy efficient appliances. So don't let the fact that you legitimately are discouraged about what's going on in Washington handcuff you from doing what you can do here in White River and in Vermont. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Hi. Mike Van Buren from Heartland. One thing we haven't talked about here tonight is Citizens United. There's something, I would like to put a different twist on it in a way, because you know, most of the people in the room here are older and they either had children or grandchildren, you know, and unfortunately I don't see a lot of like college age students or high school students sitting in here. And what I've been experiencing in my little world is seeing, you know, the loss of hope in the Democratic Party by younger people. I was sitting with my son-in-law the other night, and he said, "Look, I'm out of it." And here's a Democratic activist who's like really disheartened. And you know, I'm thinking, I'm older, I know better. He'll come back or something like that. But I think there's a real problem, and I think just by looking around the room in here, that's expressed, because you know we're all like a few Dartmouth students or something like that. Where's that group? You know, what are they doing? And you know it. And another thing. You know, we're full-time Vermont residents, but we drive down to Florida once a year, and we see family down there. And along the way, we stop. And it so happened, like I was in South Carolina during the primary last spring. And what I was aware of at that time was that here was NPR, who I used to trust, but don't so much anymore, with not even mentioning Bertie's name during the primary. I mean, and that comes back to like Citizens United. The youth of this country is pissed off. And there's such a wash of money, and I think it's infected even public radio. And I'm a supporter of VPR, you know, but I tend to be less supportive of NPR because I feel like it's just a big show. They want the status quo, and now look what's happened with the Democratic National Committee.
Well, let me try to just address that a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there's two things. One, you're talking about Citizens United. That's appalling. Right? It's appalling.
Oh, yeah.
The Supreme Court of the United States gets it wrong when it defines who is a person.
Right.
Remember before the Civil War, the Dred Scott decision? They decided that an African American was not a person. I mean, how can that happen? And then they decided, the Supreme Court that decided an African American was not a person decided a corporation was. So they're kind of messed up. when it comes to personhood. And Citizen United and gerrymandering, those two things are the biggest threats to our democracy. And they do breed a lot of cynicism, and they do breed a lot of hopelessness, because the Koch brothers, you can write $1 billion check or whatever it was. They spent, what, $880 million in this campaign? Then you're an everyday person, and you send in your 25 bucks, you kind of think it doesn't matter that much. So we do have to get the money out of politics, and it's going to take a constitutional amendment or a new court. I mean, that's what was so really discouraging about the Congress, the Senate, not even taking up for consideration the Obama nomination of the Supreme Court justice. The second thing, on young people getting involved or not, I actually see a lot of people getting involved in the environmental movement. Electoral politics, it takes a while sometimes for people to decide that it actually is relevant, even if they don't like a lot of aspects to it. But I have seen so much incredibly good energy from young people on the environmental issues of the time. And in fact, I think they're, more than anyone else, providing the real energy that is going to get us to where ultimately we need to be. So let's hang in. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Congressman Welch, Edward Bradley, White River Junction. I come to echo what Roger Masters said about your service to Vermont and to the United States. I'm very grateful to you, and I urge you to keep on in the way you have been doing, and thanks, with all of our support. But I actually come out to bring you a gift, to bring all of us a gift. I speak as someone who is currently teaching Latin to Dartmouth students, and I set for the Latin class a challenge to create a new version of the Great Seal of the United States in the light of contemporary political personalities and realities. And I have the two prize-winning versions, one by a Vermonter, a boy who grew up in Shelburne. Currently, I think he's a senior at Dartmouth. And the other, a man actually who was born in England, but is very much an American. So may I come forward and just show these to you and to the world?
Bring them on up. Let's go. Let's get a look. I took Latin in high school with Sister Mary Amabilis.
So here is what's called the obverse, the Great Seal of the United States. And in place of the Eye of Providence, we have the head of Donald Trump. And then in place of the Virgilian quotation, which indicated that Providence gave its assent to the American experiment, we have two words in Latin, vanitas, which means falsehood and emptiness, and then imperium, which means supreme rule. And at the base of the pyramid, we've changed the date of 1776 to 2017, and we have, in place of the Latin Novus Ordo Cyclorum, the new order of the ages, we have mendacium pro veritate, falsehood in place of truth. So that's the honor. Then the reverse, somewhat subtler. The reverse of the Great Seal is also the seal of the President of the United States. And here we have just a modification, two modifications. One is to the head of the eagle. The eagle has lost his head and has the hair of Donald Trump, and to the extent possible, that peculiar coloration of his complexion, that apoplectic complexion, which we hope, I hope, will lead mortally to his impeachment. We can only hope for that. If people continue to parade with signs saying, remember Hillary, 2.8 million, we may get it. And then the device e pluribus unum has become, as you could predict, e pluribus ego.
Well, that's pretty good. All right. Thank you very much. I always knew Latin would come in handy.
Well done.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. Mike Volosos from White River Junction, just retired as a nurse at Hitchcock. And I have a bit of a cognitive problem at the moment, so if you'll bear with me. On Wednesday at the courthouse, a stone's throw from here, a family, someone came for a DUI charge and didn't quite make it to his hearing. ICE agents grabbed him and his family. A friend happened to see it and was upset by it. So I began trying to sort it out and find out what I could. and that was nothing. I called the Vermont Law School, and is there anyone here from Vermont Law? No. So they have an immigration assistance program, and so they looked into it. They did find Angel Garcia was in the system, and they were trying to get him, make sure he had adequate legal counsel. They were unable to find out where he was. And the family, 2 adult females and a child, no one knows. So this is Vermont.
Right.
This reminds me of Germany, just pre-World War II. And how does one decide? I don't say that this man didn't commit a crime and that they weren't within their legal right, but there's no accountability. I believe we should have to have that reported in the state.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You know, unfortunately, that story that you just described has been repeated across the country with a good deal of intensity since the president was elected. You know, there's a real challenge on this whole question of immigration, but there's universal desire to have border security, but I think that there's universal desire, there's broad support, and we saw it in the Senate. A bipartisan bill was passed a few years ago with John McCain, a prominent supporter, that would have provided some path to citizenship for folks who were here. And there's a lot of kids who were brought here as kids that have been going to grammar school, high school, and college, and they're serving in the military, and they're subject to getting deported in that same very, very harsh way. So that's heartbreaking. And it's on Congress, because we really should be passing a comprehensive immigration bill. But you know, in the State of the Union, or I guess it wasn't formally a State of the Union, but President Trump talked about the crime that was committed by an illegal alien who got out of jail. Well, you want to know something? Any kind of crime by any person we don't like, especially a violent crime. And whether the status of that person is that they're illegal or they're legal, that crime is what's to be condemned, not a whole category of people to suggest that all illegal immigrants are engaged in criminal conduct. It's just not that way. You know, I was earlier today, I was in Burlington, and we had a round table. It was actually in Winooski, and there was about 20 immigrants, and they all got here legally, but it was really tough. And we're having a big challenge now as to whether we're going to close our borders even to people fleeing incredible hardship and violence. And the stories of these people are unbelievable. You know, the fact is, immigrants work pretty hard. They're like hard workers, and the thing that keeps them going is they want to make a better life. They want to be able to get a stake in the ground so they can get their family members over here, and they really contribute. And then the odds that these people have to contend with, some of them were from Bhutan. They'd spent 17 years in a refugee camp. Can you imagine that, where you really can't be who you are? It's very tough to get the education. It's tough. You're in limbo all that time. And they're over here now, and they're running businesses. You know, so I like your orientation, your attitude on this, and it's really it's what America's all about, as we know. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Peter. Barry Shamus from Westminster West. Yep. I wrote you last year, and you wrote me a handwritten note, and I appreciated that. And the issue that I wrote you about was election fraud. Now, let's not confuse election fraud with voter fraud. I do not think there is voter fraud in this country. But my experience as having been a texter for Bernie, I texted initially 60,000 people in this country, and I had conversations with 22,000 people. Most of it was around get out the vote. So I was in contact with people when they were in the voting, not the polling places.
Right.
In particular, we saw horrible things happen in Arizona, but we saw other problems in other places. And my question to you last year was, what is being done about looking into election fraud? And you told me then in this note that you were concerned about it also, and it was being handled by the Justice Department. Now, we've seen the Justice Department will hire somebody or have somebody in charge of it that doesn't follow the law. And all of these discussions will mean nothing if we don't have integrity with our elections. So I'm wondering where you're thinking about that today and how to move forward.
Well, thank you. The biggest problem we have is with voter suppression actions by state legislatures. And it has traditionally been the Justice Department that would take enforcement action against state laws that have as their goal suppressing the vote, right? And that's really a tactic that's adopted by some now. So the Justice Department now is being run by Jeff Sessions. I have less confidence that he'll pursue.
But there's also a lot of concern about the election, the machines that are doing the counting and that have no paper trail.
Yeah, I don't on the machine stuff. I'm not with you on that. I'm much more worried about the voter suppression.
Well,
laws.
I think that's a problem too. I think that we have primaries that we don't allow independents to vote in is a huge problem, and that's a problem that the Democrats have exacerbated by perpetuating it and wanting it, and that's a big problem because
that's been changing a lot. The biggest state that has that party registration where it really made a difference and was tough on Bernie was New York State.
That's
because
correct.
they had a registration system where you had to like register
October.
Was it October? Yeah, so a lot of people weren't even paying attention to the election, and if they wanted to register close to the election, they weren't able to do it. So I acknowledge that can be a problem, but I think it's the issue of voting in the primary in most states is starting to get more accessible. The thing I worry about the most is legislatures passing voter suppression laws, and that's something we're seeing happen quite a bit in the South.
May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
And that is about the Democratic Party. There was a little discussion about Citizens United, and that it seems as if the Democratic Party continues to be a party of the corporatists, the people that just elected Tom Perez instead of Keith Ellison. So what are the people that are in the party right now doing?
Well, look, here's the thing. Bernie had a huge impact on this party, okay?
Let's hope.
No, he did.
Okay.
He really did, and we've got to give him a lot of credit.
Yeah.
We really do. And what you're seeing, even in this election, Tom Perez is not a corporate Democrat. I mean, Keith Ellison is a very close friend. He and I were elected the same year. He's fantastic. I love the way he's the vice chair. He came up like 30 votes short. But Tom Perez is somebody who dedicated his life to working in the Civil Rights Division. He was a tremendous Secretary of Labor. You know, he was really on the side of working people. So whatever your disappointment is that Keith didn't get it, there's not like a corporate type of Democrat in Tom Perez. But your point, I think, largely is how do you make the party and how do you make politics responsive to the real needs of everyday people? And that was a question that was sort of suggested in why aren't young people involved? And that's a challenge for us that just goes on and on and on. It's never going to stop. But I do think that Bernie had even though Bernie's not a Democrat, he had a huge impact on the Democratic Party. And you're just seeing in that Ellison race, Ellison came within an eyelash of being elected as the party chair, and now he is the vice chair. So his voice is going to be at the table.
He's not the vice chair. He was given a position, deputy chair, that is taken out of thin air, that has absolutely no precedent.
You want to know? I'm going to challenge you on that. I was with Keith yesterday,
okay.
2 days ago.
All right, please do.
He's excited about it.
Okay.
All right, and he and Tom Perez are getting along real well. So this is not going to be a token type of deal. All right.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Catherine Newbury. I live in Thetford. I want to thank you for the strong stance that you're taking on the immigrant issue. And I agree with the previous speaker who mentioned his concern that this kind of roundup resembles what was going on in Germany. It hasn't gotten to that point, but we did incarcerate Japanese during World War II.
Right.
We have a history. And I am very alarmed by the kinds of things that ICE is doing and the Border Patrol. My question, though, focuses on another issue, but I hope you will continue to speak out on this issue and encourage your colleagues to do so, because among the population there is huge concern about this. My question actually has to do with the budget and the plans of the president to triple military spending, and as you also already mentioned, and cut other areas, including the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts, which are actually a very tiny proportion of the budget. There's always been bipartisan support for funding those institutions, and they do an enormous deal of good by partnering with local organizations and NGOs and government agencies. And the State Department. How can we give up the one institution in our society that promotes soft power overseas? As it is, our diplomats are way too few, and the State Department budget will be gutted if this budget goes through. So my question to you is, what kinds of procedural strategies can you and others, Democrats, and maybe you can find some allies among Republicans, to fight this? And I realize you're in a minority, but is it even feasible that that will go through? I am very, very concerned about it.
All right. Well, you are right to be concerned about it, because that's the goal of the Trump administration, to do exactly what you just said. Everything you said, I totally agree with. Now, there's some hope, like on that State Department budget. My wife, Margaret, her dad was a State Department diplomat, and she traveled all around, and he got his hands dirty doing good things. But I don't know if you saw this, but General Mattis, who's the defense secretary, he's arguing not to cut the State Department. And he's, in his blunt way, he says, if you cut the State Department budget, I'm going to have to buy more ammunition. He gets the connection. So the thing, we don't have the votes to stop it, but we've got the arguments to make that hopefully can point out that even General Mattis is saying this is a really unwise approach. And by the way, on this spending, this is unbelievable what's happening. All right, we've got areas where we've got to address spending, and I believe in paying bills, okay? And I think we've got to get the cost of health care down. We spend way too much on that and get way too little. But our domestic discretionary spending, and that's for the State Department, it's for the national parks, it's for Pell Grants, it's for Stafford loans. That is at a level that, as a percentage of our gross domestic product, is less than it was when President Eisenhower was in charge. And that was before we had Medicaid and Medicare. So there is a squeeze that's going on here that is really going to be bad for the country. You know, you've got to invest in the future. You've got to invest in the future. And we all of us want to get rid of wasteful spending. And we all want to have efficient programs. But you've got to make judgments about what is wise spending and what isn't. And that's what's really toxic in D.C. right now, because the prevailing attitude is more for defense and less for everything else is the way to go. And it's not. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm Hank Cheney from St. Johnsbury. And actually, we've talked about this issue from my heart previously a couple of years ago in St. Johnsbury. But since 1972, I have worked in the state of Vermont as a clergy person and am now retired. My wife is a retired special educator. Our entire lives have been spent working for the underdog, the impoverished people, the handicapped. We're the parents of a 47-year-old son who has cerebral palsy. He did not choose to spend his life in a wheelchair. We are so vitally concerned with the heart of our country that seems to be destroyed at this time. I'm concerned with Planned Parenthood defunding. I'm concerned when I read that they want to stop dental care for children through Medicaid. I'm concerned for all of us, the majority of us in this room, with the proposed cuts in Social Security. It just seems like our country is losing its heart, and I shall cry.
Or fight.
I will do that.
And you'll keep fighting. Thank you very much. You're right. We're the richest country in the world. All right? And we've got a situation here. It's called income inequality. A lot of folks are making billions and billions of dollars. Look at the Trump cabinet. You got to be a billionaire to get in. I mean, if you got a couple $100 million, they'll give you a look. But you've got to basically be a billionaire. So there's no reason we can't do that. And I just want to thank you and your wife for serving so many Vermonters as you have. And all of us, our heart goes out to you with the wonderful care you've given to your 47-year-old son who needed you every day. Thank you. Yes, sir. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Michelle Boslin. I'm from Westminster, Vermont. And I'm a teacher during the school year, and in the summer I work for World Learning, which is based out of Brattleboro and also DC. I do youth programs with youth from other countries and with American students. And pretty much every comment that's been made today, I agree with, so thanks everybody, such a good crowd to be a part of. But I wanted to actually put in 2 cents for the same comment as the woman who was standing in front of me, which is on State Department funding. The programs that I do for World Learning are taking youth from around the world, mostly from countries that the U.S. is not necessarily very friendly with, bringing those young people to the United States to do interactive programs, to study civic engagement, to learn about democracy, to do homestays, to live in communities, to meet with people. Those are funded by the State Department. So this year we have 160 kids through World Learning that are supposed to be coming from Iraq to the United States, to be going to all different states around the U.S., to be living, learning, and integrating with our people, learning about what life is like in America and going back to Iraq, and also interacting with American youth. Those programs are funded almost entirely by the State Department. They're amazing, amazing programs. And if the State Department budget is cut, and if the idiot in the White House has his say in terms of the visa issues, those kids aren't going to come in, that is devastating. If we're looking at a peaceful future for our world, we need to be building it from the young people. And people have said, we're all old in this crowd. Well, the young people are not old. And they need to know each other, and they need to trust each other, and they need to build trust and friendship in our community and in our world. So please, save the State Department and keep the money in the youth programs, because that's our future.
All right, let's a round of applause for that. I will do every single thing I can, and thank you for that. That's great. Thank you. Are you our last questioner?
I might be.
People getting anxious? They gotta go watch Netflix, go to a play. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tressa Verino from Westminster West. I work with underprivileged children, and before that I was in organic farmers, and I'm from Vermont. Since the election, every day I see something in the news that just scares me. And I have to say that I didn't ever expect it to be quite so intense, and that the administration would be doing things just on an ongoing basis that seems to be eroding our democracy. So I know we've done a lot of pleasantries here, but I just want to read something that makes me scared. This is from a display in the United States Holocaust Museum. It says, early warning signs of fascism, powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for human rights, identification of enemies as a unifying cause, supremacy of the military, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsession with national security, religion and government intertwined, corporate power protected, labor power suppressed, disdain for intellectuals and the arts, obsession with crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption, and fraudulent elections. I just wanted to...
You know, that's pretty sobering. That's really, really sobering. And what it reminds me of is something that we have to remember all the time, and that is democracy is fragile. And we can take it for granted because we've had an enduring democracy for over 200 years. But it's very fragile, and the ability of people to lose it is within reach at almost any moment. And that's what happened in Germany. And it's alarming to have the recitation of those things and start thinking about what's going on now. But that's why it's not just my job, it's your job in every way that you can, as uncertain as the outcome will be, to do what you can to maintain that democratic tradition that we are custodians of, and it's up to us to make certain it doesn't slip away. So that was, I think, kind of a stunning reading you gave, but it's a reminder of the work that we have to do, and thank you very much.
Can I say one more thing?
Well, sure.
So I read these scary things, but I also read, like, when something really difficult happens, that tenfold people come out and help people out. So
right.
I have a lot of hope, and I really, invite everybody to embrace hope and to resist fear. And I just want to say personally, every day I try to do something for at least 5 minutes, and I love getting my body out there. I do believe that protests work. I think that it just sends a message, a support to you, and I encourage everybody to know that each one of us becomes a sea of hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Congressman Welch. I want to thank you again for representing our principles of Vermont so well in Washington. Very practical question. I've heard the local organizing. I've heard the get your friends and family who live in Ohio and Western Pennsylvania on your listserv and encourage them to go. From a practical standpoint, Congressman Custer at her town meeting at APD last week encouraged us to contact moderate Republicans, as she thought that was one of the most efficacious ways of influencing things.
I think that's a good idea.
And I just want to know, is it really worth it if you are not a constituent to still contact those people?
It's more effective, in all candor, if I hear from a Vermonter, that's more persuasive to me than if I hear from somebody in Texas. But if somebody from Texas is calling to tell me I'm doing a good job, I like that better than them calling to tell me I'm doing a bad job. Okay?
Well, that's so exactly the idea I had.
It does matter.
If we see a positive thing, like Senator Portman being concerned about the ACA, writing him a note saying thank you for your principled stance.
I think that really matters because at the end of the day, the way it is right now with the Republican-Democratic split, the Republicans in the majority, in order for us to ultimately get to where we need to be, we're going to need some good Republicans to stand up. Remember in the Nixon years, it was folks like you, Scott, who in Baker, there were some Republicans who just understood what was at stake, and they played an outsized role because we needed them, and the country needed them. Thank you.
She mentioned Senator Collins, Senator Murkowski, Senator Portman.
Yeah.
These people who are doing things that we need to say
right.
Thank you.
I think that's a good idea. Okay, you get the last word. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in. Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Lucy Danger, and I live here in White River Junction. I have kind of 2 points. So number one, I have heard a lot of people commenting on a lack of youth involved in activism and grassroots politics. And as a young person and as a youth activist, I have a suggestion regarding that. So first of all, the person who said, ensure that programs directed towards youth stay funded and stay out there. I think that's really important. And also, if people like you who are prominent in politics begin to work with youth-led and youth-directed organizations that can really serve as a bridge between, I think there's often a separation between social activism and political activism, and I think that can serve as a bridge because at the end of the day, if social activism is changing minds, political activism is changing what is actually the law and happening, and that's a really vital connection to make. So I would be really heartened to see you trying to form connections with youth-led organizations.
That's a great suggestion, and I've got folks from my staff here, and if you have some specific organizations you want us to reach out to, I will, but I really appreciate it. Young People for a Democratic Future, thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for coming. I got to tell you, it's dark times and the country's losing its way in D.C., but it gives me such hope to have so many of you show up, to see your concern, your energy, and your commitment to our future. We're going to get through this. It's what I said in the beginning. There's nothing wrong with America. It's what's right with America won't get us to where we need to be. So thank you one and all for coming. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to sign up to get on our newsletter from my office, we've got folks outside, but thank you one and all and have a good evening.